Why is it that some things just mysteriously work out? Why is it that the most unimaginable things, the miracles, the synchronicities, why do they happen? Today's episode was inspired by a quote from an interview that I did with Sri Dharma Mittra. And he said in this interview, if you trust, if you have no fear, mysteriously, things fall into place. Let's listen to it.
And I have no money, I think $50. The Swami could not lend me much money. I didn't care. I just took my bag. And then someone in the street was screaming, Dharma, Dharma, where are you going? I said, I don't know. He said to me, let's go downtown, City Hall. I have a big space there, 300,000 square feet, a studio. I'll give a little space there to start your yoga center.
Beautiful.
I said, that's it. Just like my guru said. Everything just came in the right time, everything. That was a great thing. If you trust, have no fear, mysteriously, things fall in place.
Yes. I bring all of this up, and I've just played this clip for you, because while it's so easy to skip over these sort of things in life, because there are other more tangible things that we can be focusing on, and there's this tendency that I found in myself and in others to value those more traditional, logical answers more than the mystery, because we feel that we cannot control the mystery. And we're right in many ways, but there are so many things that we can do to prime ourselves to be able to see the mystery and to be able to experience more of the mystery. I think about this story that Dharma shared with us often, because what he's speaking to is really two things. It's the experience of feeling like you're being guided. And it's also the experience of going all in. It's not the experience of walking down the street and wondering what, your backup plan is and how soon you're going to have to go back to what you were doing before. It's walking down the street with such certainty, not knowing exactly how it's going to work out, but feeling a sense of certainness and trust in your path. So often in my own life, I've found myself being a toe dipper, where you're just sort of dipping one toe in and you're like, you know what, I'm going to dip this toe in. If the water feels right, then I'm going to get in. But if it doesn't, then, at least I'm still out and I'm still dry and I'm still safe and I've got all these backup plans. And inevitably what ends up happening is that your mind gets cluttered down with all of the other possibilities, and you don't really ever exist in that sense of trust. The second feeling, this feeling of being guided, or I guess the first one that I told you about, is that he feels like he's being sort of pulled along because he's out the door and he's walking through the park, and before he's gotten that far, somebody is already arriving into his path and giving him a next step, a next felt right step. So I want to tell you a story about my own life, one of the stories that most changed my own life. And if you know me personally, you're going to know this story. If you're newer to the podcast, you may not actually know the story at all. A few years ago, I guess more than a couple years ago, about 8 years ago now, I went to study abroad, and I went to Ecuador. I actually had 2 papers in front of me. I had one to go to India, and I had one to go to Ecuador at the exact same time, and I felt this literal parallel universes in front of me. And I remember looking at those papers, and I had felt that India was the obvious answer because I was sort of fascinated by yoga, and I thought that would make sense for me. But I felt also this deep calling and this longing for the Spanish language. And I said, you know what? Actually, I want to learn Spanish. I'm going to go to Ecuador. But the minute that I got to Ecuador, I knew that everything that I was experiencing in my life back home was not exactly right for me. I just couldn't even put my finger on it, but I couldn't stand to continue with the status quo. I felt like I was in this brand new world of possibilities. I feel like all of the space that I created and the decisiveness with which I created that space essentially resulted in a vacuum effect where there was so much that joy and happiness and excitement and zest for life, I will say. I don't know how else to describe it. That sounds so cheesy. But all of these feelings flooded into me, and I would go to the park in the mornings and I would run and I would stretch and I would just be feeling like I was on top of the world. And in that park, where I was experiencing so much joy each and every morning, there was a juice stand. For some reason, I never went to that juice stand for several weeks until I was actually with a friend of mine who was basically nagging. She's like, I really want to go to the juice stand. I want to go. And I was like, fine, I'm going, but I don't know if I'm going to get anything, but I'll go with you. And I remember myself, I was sitting there and I look over and I see the said juice man who was making the juices. And I said, I'm going to get me a juice because that juice man is fine. He was beautiful. He had the best aura, this vibrant energy, this big smile. I remembered it immediately. And so I took down my hair, which was in a messy bun, and I let it flow. And I walked up and I was like, Quiero un jugo de naranja, por favor, but in really bad Spanish. I'll spare you the details because now is not the time to recite that entire love story, although I do have episodes on my story specifically if you want to hear all of the juicy details of it, for the most part at least. But I went to Ecuador to learn Spanish, and I came back with a man who is now my husband of over 5 years. The story may seem wild enough as it is, or maybe not that wild to you, but for me, this was really the first time that I threw logic to the wind, and I said, screw it, I'm gonna do whatever it takes in order to be with this person, because I felt it, and I didn't care what had to be done. I didn't care about the lengthy visa processes and the months and months and months that we had to do distance and the flights that I spent literally all of my money on. The craziest part is all of the things that came into place mysteriously. The things arrived in order to help me fulfill this mission and help us to fulfill our mission of being together. And one of those specific examples, to give you just a taste of what I'm discussing, is that I used to work on a farm during the summers, and the farm was great, but my $13 per hour, which was generous, by the way, for the kind of work that I was doing, my $13 per hour salary was not really supporting international flights, and it was certainly not supporting having an immigration attorney, so I ended up doing it all on my own. But I also needed to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to do all of the paperwork, even though we didn't have an attorney. And so I just had such certainty in my path that I wasn't going to be worried about, I don't know if we can be together because I don't know how this is going to work out. No, obviously, right? So as I'm going about my day-to-day business and I'm just continuing to work on the farm and to save up money, there was one particular day that a company came, and this company was from Spain. It was an engineering company from Spain. And I overheard them speaking Spanish, and I butted in, flexing my newly fluent Spanish skills. And they were so impressed and thought it was so wonderful that I had learned a foreign language as an adult, that they said, hey, you know what? We actually need to learn English. Can you teach English to us and to some of our other employees? And I said, why, yes, I can. Here's my email. What's your email, by the way? Because I was like, I'm definitely following up on this. This seems like an aligned work opportunity. And so I ended up having the call with them, and they asked me what I would charge. And I remember really thinking about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to say $35 an hour. Like, it felt like a lot of money, but I even prefaced it with that. I think I said, I know this is a lot, but because I have to prepare and I have to do this and that, $35 an hour. I almost said it like without the ability to even hear myself say it. And there was this long silence on the phone, and I was like, oh no, I've asked for too much. Oh, I needed this, I need this, I want this job. And they said, no, actually, 35 is really low. How about 60? And we'll also pay you your preparation hours, and we'll pay you your drive time hours as well. The deal was signed. The contract was signed immediately, as you can imagine. And suddenly, I went from having meager income to having enough to cover all of these expenses that I needed. The problem was not solved by freaking out, by freezing up, by doing more. It was solved by continuing, being in the right place at the right time, and in continuing to do what brought me joy, which was speaking Spanish. I have a kind of crazy thought experiment for you, almost like I'll deliver it like a little guided contemplation, little guided meditation. But before I get into that, I have two things to tell you and one thing to ask of you. I feel like it's like two truths and one lie. Just kidding, they're all truths. Well, actually, the lie is that you have to do anything necessarily to help support the podcast, but I would love it if out of the kindness of your heart, you want to do something just for me, out of the kindness of your heart, with maybe actually the potential for a reward for you as well. Then you will listen to this next section. The first thing I want to tell you is that some of you have been DMing me to ask me more details about using Offering Tree as your software for organizing your business online as a yoga teacher, which makes me really happy because I've had a wonderful experience with Offering Tree. And the principal thing that I notice about them is that they have a vested interest and care in us as yoga teachers and studio owners. And that shows in the kind of product that they have created. Offering Tree is the sponsor of this podcast. And as many of you know, I've been going through a move across the country, but I've also been going through a move in terms of getting organized with my business in a way that I never have before. And Offering Tree has the setup for everything that I need, everything that we need as yoga teachers. It's the home for your website, it's your booking links, your schedule, your financial reporting, even your own online library of classes and courses. And if you're curious about that whole process, I want to invite you to queue up my most recent episode, which is called Growing Your Business and Moral Ambition as a Yoga Teacher, which has a really nice overview as well of my experience with Offering Tree. And you can use the link in my show notes to get a free trial and also to get a significant discount off of your entire first year. Drum roll, please. Number 2, here's that little reward that I was talking about. I have a giveaway called Tend Yourself and a Friend because my friend Art created Tend, a zero-waste home and body care brand rooted in Ayurveda. And Tend is really a feeling of slowing down, of reconnecting and living in harmony with nature, and tending to our bodies, to our homes, and also to our planet. So this giveaway is going to be announced on December 12th. And if you win, you will receive something to enjoy yourself and also something to remind us that the greatest joy of all is actually in the giving. So you will be receiving something that you will be able to give to a friend as well. The link to enter the giveaway is in the show notes, and you'll see I actually have one of the little oils here that I really love from Tend. I've been using this for, I think, almost a year. I've been using the Tend products. This one is called Harmony, and I use them actually to give myself a little self-massage. Helps me wind down and definitely sleep better. But the main thing about Tend is that you can feel the energy, you can feel the intention behind each product that Art has created. So go and enter for that giveaway if you want just a little treat for you and for a friend. And the luck is always with you. Somebody who's listening to these words is going to win, so maybe that's you. Number 3, please take a moment to pause, to drop me a rating, to subscribe to my show if you have not already done so, and also to consider sharing this episode with the world. Each and every time I see one of you shares the podcast to your stories, I do a little dance with joy. I'm not kidding you. So if you want to make me dance with joy, share it to your stories as well. It's incredibly helpful. That's really what drives the momentum of the podcast. Today, on the Leadership and Yoga podcast, mysteriously, it all works out. Sit back, relax, but also lean in. I was speaking to one of my good friends, Marla, about the experience of feeling that things are mysteriously working out for you. And she summed it up so perfectly by asking the question, how can I stay in that energy? And in that energy means in the feeling of being all in, of trusting. And rather than just pointing to synchronicities and laughing at coincidences, you start to live by them. You start to feel pulled closer to them. You start to see more and more, so much so that it almost becomes overwhelming. It starts to feel quite literally like you're drinking from a fire hose. It's so much once you start to see it that it almost feels like you want to shut it off. It feels like things are getting out of your control. It's so good and so intense, but it's feeling like it's getting out of your control. And what you're really realizing is that none of it was ever in your control. Well, it is heavily under your influence, but it was never going to be manipulated by things like force and control. It's manipulated by who you are and by what you pay attention to. That's what's been creating it all along. And when I think about what helped me most personally to stay with the energy of trust rather than falling into fear and control and forcing things, it wasn't tips and tactics and how-to lists. It wasn't being told what I should do exactly. It was hearing stories that gave me the inspiration to look for the magic in life and the energy to problem solve along the way. It was hearing stories that gave me the inspiration to look for the magic in life and the energy to problem solve along the way. So here we are into the thought experiment that I have written for you. And I want to explain to you that I've wanted to talk about these topics for a really long time, but I often don't find the clarity or the ability to do so. And 2 days ago, I was sitting outside having my morning coffee in the cold, and I took out my phone and began to voice note all of this down, pretty much word for word. And so while I know it can feel a little bit out there, just know that if you feel resistance to these ideas, that's also part of the intention. I'm not expecting you to believe this thought experiment that I'm about to deliver to you, but I just want you to know that it comes with the best intention to make an incredibly complex thing a little bit more simple. And it also comes from a fresh morning mind, not from anything else. So I'm not requesting that you decide whether or not you believe this, but rather enjoy the story of this and just let it be a thought experiment for our purposes right now. Imagine for a moment that you were part of a greater consciousness. You could call it God. You could quite literally just call it a cloud of energy, or perhaps one giant divine crystal. But imagine this energy in its purest form is absolutely perfect. Let's imagine that it knows everything and it knows no limitation. It knows much more than AI. because its knowing extends beyond the intellectual into the kind of knowing that comes deep from your gut, deep from the core of your being. It is a sense of knowing that is grounded. Let's imagine that this God consciousness has been around for an infinite amount of time, so it's experienced every single possibility. It wants to know what it is. It wants to play. It wants to discover itself, sound familiar. And in the process of discovering what it is, it only makes sense that it also wants to discover and understand that which it is not. So what would be the opposite of what it is? What would that be? It would be limitation, lack, time, not knowing everything. It would be experiencing lack for the first time. But how could the infinite experience lack? Let's imagine that this perfect crystal, that cloud of energy, that God itself, shatters itself into billions and billions of parts, infinite parts, into fractals. And what makes a fractal different than just a bunch of broken pieces, like a shattered plate on the floor, is that when we talk about fractals, each and every fractal contains the original blueprint. Each and every fractal contains the whole. In this case, using the story of our divine crystal, each shard would contain the divine itself. Are you following me? You could say that the divine wants to know what limitation feels like. It wants to experience life through limitation of time, limitation of space, of movement, of love, of health, of wealth, of money, of mindset and emotions, through the physical form of nature. Perhaps us. Perhaps through our eyes. And maybe the plan wasn't ever exactly to experience it through the human being, but nature is always perfect in her creations, and if this divine, all-knowing consciousness has an infinite amount of time, what would it matter to wait billions of years and millions of years for universes and planets and entire species to grow until one day consciousness is finally ripe like fruit on a vine? And what if this divine intelligence knew that each part of it, each part of its whole, each fractal, each shard of the crystal, each drop of the cloud, each being is infinitely intelligent. And so in order for it to ever forget its true nature, this life, this human game, this earth game had to be incredibly convincing. Nature itself had to be perfect in design for us to ever fool ourselves into thinking that we could really experience limitation. It had to be absolutely real, all-encompassing, immersive, real. And it is real, because it's the life that we live and that we know, but some part of us also tries to answer the questions our mind can't quite wrap around. It feels like our current processing system can't quite see all of the possibilities. It can't understand how much space is an infinite amount of space, and into what that space could be infinitely expanding into if space is infinitely expanding, like they tell us it is. If we go forever in one direction, where will we end up? Would we ever end up back on the other side? And yet, even though we can't understand it and we don't have the answers, there's some part of us that senses there's more at play here than we comprehend. There's some part of us that occasionally taps into some sense of inner knowing, some sense of inner strength that shocks us. We see it in other people all the time, and when we're lucky, we see it in ourselves too. We see that we are more powerful than we've been led to believe, that we have more power than we've ever let ourselves believe, that we can either play by the rules that we've been given or we can start to rewrite them. And so imagine us here experiencing our lack and our limitation, always needing and wanting something more. More money, more time, more beauty, more love, more understanding. We dive more and more deeply into each of the mysteries in front of us, into the millions of mysteries that are right in front of us at any given moment. We break down an atom until we discover that it is 99.9999% energy, 99.99% nothing, 99% space. You touch things and they feel solid, and yet you know they are not. But in order to continue living a human life, you often set that aside, as I do too. But if there's one thing I think that we are all instilled with, not that I claim to know why we are here, or if this theory that I sometimes contemplate holds any truth. It's that there's a deep sense of human adventure instilled within us. And adventure is not limited to external adventure. It is not limited to external things and external experiences, no. It includes adventuring deep into the core of who we are and what we are made of. In there, within us, there's so much more information and possibility than there is in the lessons and intellectual knowledge alone. And so when we want more adventure, we need only to look and start to see the synchronicity. We need only to reconnect with the magic that is happening all around us. We need only to start to contemplate how much of that magic is actually truly created by us on some level, on some plane of existence. As we go on this adventure, you can picture us like explorers or superheroes. You can imagine us as we go through life. We go regaining power. We go rediscovering what we are really made of and what we are actually capable of. We make breakthrough after breakthrough in our awareness and our understanding of what it really means to be here in this human life. We go shedding our limitations and our fixations on limitation, and we start to find more liberation. Liberation in the way suddenly our pen moves on the page and the ideas flow. Liberation in being given a gift exactly in the moment that you needed it. Liberation in giving your whole heart without fear. Liberation of acceptance, liberation of change. And I think we are all on the cusp of this understanding with our love of speaking about manifestation and meditation and self-care. We long to set ourselves up with the opportunity to grow, with the ability to have the eyes to see what's really going on here. And so, setting aside the ideas of the divine crystal and where we come from and the questions that we need not answer today, what I realize has helped me change my life to live with adventure, to rediscover enough of my power to take action and do things that I once believed impossible for me, was not to hear about theories. It was to hear stories, to be reminded again and again what humans are capable of, to hear stories of miracles, but also the way things, simple things, just mysteriously work out. You know, hearing other people's stories changed my life. I used to consume and watch the lives of yogis in tropical places online when I had a BS job that involved filing a couple sheets of paper over a 7-hour period. If I would have stayed and kept collecting that paycheck, my growing anxiety in those days would have eventually swallowed me whole and spit me out the other side, but it would have taken a long time because I was deeply afraid. I was afraid of instability. I was in the jaws of the feeling of lack, the feeling of this is the only way, of this is my path that I have chosen, and now that I've chosen, I can't go back. But luckily, I started to hear stories of what else was possible, so today, I want to share with you the way that things have mysteriously worked out for myself and others. Time and time again. Despite all odds, despite the discomfort, despite the impatience, despite the not knowing. To remind you that if you were to look at life like a puzzle, it is so much more entertaining to spend years and years putting together a puzzle than it is to spend years and years staring at a pre-assembled puzzle. And I almost guarantee you, if you had to spend decades in a room with an assembled puzzle put together in a frame on the wall, that each and every one of us would take down the puzzle off the wall, break the frame, take it all apart, and spend our time putting it back together again. Because that, my friends, may just be an experiment worthy of the divine consciousness. Whew. Let me have a sip of cinnamon tea as you let all that soak in and stretch my legs a little bit. So I've just made an executive decision, because there's not anyone else here to consult it with anyways, that this episode is going to have a sequel. And the sequel is going to be where I actually get into what's required of us in order to stay in that energy and to have eyes for mysteries. But today, I'm still going to tell you a couple stories. I was actually planning on telling someone else's story, and I'm not kidding you, in the writing down of the notes about that story that I wanted to tell, this morning I experienced a very similar situation, which is crazy. It doesn't always happen that fast, I must say. I joke, but basically what happened is that I fell into the sinking sand of trying to control things and experiencing the definite feeling of lack in a very numerical sense, because right now the opportunities that I have coming for me on the podcast are greater than my budget that I have for the podcast. And this is a moment that I always am grateful for, because I'm having the opportunity to do the things that I always wanted. And at the same time, I'm scared shitless looking in the eye what that means in terms of the sacrifice. And before I tell you about the miracle and the magic that occurred, I want to take you through sort of the downfall. And I think every good story that inspires this sense of remembering to look for the mystery has these three parts. It has sort of this status quo and this moment of the fall. And then it has a return to a new level of understanding. And so, before I get to just the highlight of it, I want to tell you the honest truth about also what happened. I was having a bit of a freak out last night and not understanding how, in terms of the timeline of my budget and my finances, I was going to make these opportunities happen. And I could feel myself just starting to slip into this lower energy, which sounds really woo woo, I know, but once you start to understand the levels of energy, you can feel it in yourself because there start to be things that happen in your environment, like you start to spill things, you start to experience a bit of a spiral. And so, as I'm going through my day and I'm feeling this sense of frustration and this lack, and then feeling frustrated with myself because I can't get out of the feeling of the lack that I know that I shouldn't be in the first place. And I know that I need to bring myself to meditate and to do all of these things. But I'm just basically feeding more and more of my attention, trying to problem solve, trying to solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created the problem, which, as we know from that famous Einstein quote, is not possible. And as I'm going further and further down this spiral and it's getting later and later, I needed to go to the store to buy a thing of almond milk. And I go and I have the almond milk in my hands. And I asked this lady, I said, "Are you waiting in line?" And like a literal movie character, like a villain from a movie, she looks at me and goes, "Yeah, obviously," and throws up her hands and then laughs at me. I try to walk behind her, and in doing so, because she's kind of startled me with that comment, I knocked over an entire case. And then she goes, "Now look what you've done." And then as I'm picking up all the stuff off the floor, she proceeds, again, like an evil movie character, to laugh at me as I'm picking up all of this stuff. And I'm feeling myself getting more and more frazzled. And so I put it all back together and I'm standing behind her. And she goes up to the register and pays for her stuff. And then as she's walking back from the register, I was just avoiding eye contact with her because I was actually really feeling angry by that interaction that I had with her. And I didn't want to be feeling that way. She comes up and gets in my face and is like, "Oh, now you won't look at me? You won't even look at me now?" And is making this big deal and eventually walks away. And I pay for the milk. And I go back outside and I'm like, "Okay, this is enough. Like, Shauna, you are not going to continue anymore down this spiral. Like, you're gonna stop this shit right now because you know exactly what's happening here. You're making problems into things that are bigger than they actually are, and you're not being resourceful, even though you don't have a lot of resources in this particular moment." I went home, I did some movement, I took a shower, I put away all of my clothes and washed them and was like, fresh start. I sat down and I journaled out all of these things that I felt like I couldn't control that were causing me to spiral. And I finally regained a sense of presence from which really anything is possible. It's amazing just how simple a bit of actual presence and clarity can bring you. I went to sleep and I woke up. And the next morning I was working, feeling pretty good, feeling better at least. And I was interrupted in my work to find out that somebody had gifted me airline miles that is going to make all of the upcoming interviews that I have so much more attainable for me. And to find out that the scheduling conflict that was making it all a disaster had actually been entirely resolved with little to no effort. And the funniest thing is that I was still going to tell you guys this story to explain the negative implications of when we are not trusting and we are trying to force. And I wrote here before realizing the gift that was coming my way, I wrote, "My opportunities are greater than my budget, but mysteriously I always find a way." Mysteriously, I always find a way. Sometimes a little bit more last minute than others, but I always find a way. At least I have, at least for now, almost the 3 years that Leadership in Yoga has been in existence. The 22nd of November will be its third birthday. Crazy. The story that I was going to tell you before that I'm still going to tell you because it's a story from one of my favorite authors, Frederick Dodson, who is actually one of the people that I have the pleasure of interviewing. So I will have an interview with him for you soon. Is that his life is comprised of experiences like this. It's the sense of walking from miracle to miracle. And one such example of this, again, I love these clear, tangible, sort of relatable instances that we can point to. He wanted to go to a Tony Robbins event, and he wanted to go to the one that was in Fiji, and he still has them actually. They're much more expensive than some of his other programs. I believe it's like $20,000, something like that. And some of the details may have escaped me, but they're all from the Parallel Universes of Self book. But what I remember from the story is that he had tried a couple different ways. He had tried to get a loan and basically had been running into a wall on the financial side of being able to go to this event and decided, like, well, you know what? I'm going to try to teach some English because he was living in Germany at the time. I'm going to try to teach some English to some people and to earn some money. And so he starts to teach English to this group of men. And once he starts the lessons, he asked this group of men, so why do you want to learn English? Which is a very good question to ask. One would say quite a normal question to ask because they speak German and they were trying to learn English. And they said, well, we want to go to the Tony Robbins event. And I can imagine at that point, Fred was like, no shit, me too, right? Tells them that he also wants to go. And they say, great, well, it was probably unlikely anyways that we were going to learn enough English to be ready to go to that event on our own. So why don't you actually just come as our translator and we'll pay for you to go? And the thing about Tony Robbins events is that if you are a translator, then you get to attend for free and you get a little badge and you get to go. So he was like, great, look at this, it's perfect. But it gets even crazier because a little bit before the event was about to occur, they call up and they say, hey, Fred, we're so sorry, but we cannot go to the event anymore, but don't worry about it. Your plane tickets are already paid. Just go and enjoy the event. So then he got to go to the event and fully focus on just being in the event and didn't even have to be worrying about doing the work of translating it all for them. All for free. How about that? I'm going to save the rest of these kinds of stories and the exploration of what do we do with all of this information and also the little bit of a disclaimer that comes with this as well for the sequel. There's so much more to be had on this discussion, but I hope that this has given you a taste of it, and I hope that it sparked your mind to start looking for some of the mysteries that are unfolding in your own life. And as you think about them, I encourage you to write them down. I actually keep a running list of mine called the Green Light List, which I have in my own guided journal. I created this physical copy of this guided journal with one of my best friends, Katie. You can always get a copy of this too, by the way, if y'all want. There's a special that we're running on them through the end of the year, which is buy one, give one. So you're going to get 2 for the price of 1, or get the whole fam journals, 5 journals for $75, the whole fam discount. So if that's of interest to you, the link for the Ritual of Writing journal is always in the show notes. And if you do end up thinking about some synchronicities, some green light moments, some miracles, big or small, that you want to share, I always love to hear from you. If you want to send them to me on Instagram, I might just include 1 or 2 of them in the next episode. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Thanks for making a bit of time to contemplate the parts of life that are often overlooked but are really the basis of it all. All the love and all the power to you, and I will catch you in the next episode. Ciao, ciao.